What's up, everybody? I'm Stan. Welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over comic books that I picked up on Wednesday, give you my impressions, and let you know whether there's something to go back to the shop for or not. To start things off, we're going to go with Prowler number 3. So Prowler number 3 is a tie into the Clone Conspiracy, and this is really a book that has unfortunately cemented itself as being pretty much unnecessary in terms of the overall event, and it's not really doing Hobie Brown any service. It's unfortunate because I really wanted to dive into this and have a really successful comic based around the Prowler character, but I feel like it's being handcuffed by the fact that it's tied to this event, and it's just not really doing anything for me. So unfortunately, I wouldn't really be able to recommend this to anybody, and it's probably something that I'm not going to be picking up in the future. However, a book that I'm probably going to substitute in for it is Steve Rogers' Captain America number 8. So Steve Rogers' Captain America is written by Nick Spencer, and this is really picking up after Civil War II and completely ignoring almost everything that happened during that real event. Other than a few little head nods by Nick Spencer to the actual actions of the heroes that are involved, there is a cameo by Carol Danvers, and really it's Captain America basically saying, you guys did this to yourselves, this is all your own fault, and if you're not going to be more careful with this, especially when they introduce Quasar into the equation, the new Quasar, if you just keep going about this, you're going to end up in another war, which is really kind of unfortunate storytelling. I mean, it totally suits with this actual story, but it's just really a small commentary on how overall Civil War II impacted the Marvel Universe and people's perception of Civil War II and Marvel's entire crossover event, so it's definitely a little bit of commentary. But ultimately, this story is continuing to follow along with the path that Nick Spencer set out in issue number 1. Captain America is still powered by Hydra, and it's really interesting. So it's definitely a book that I recommend getting back on, and you can completely almost avoid the tie-ins of Civil War II. Unless you want to have Nick Spencer write an actual comprehensive and really nice tie-in to an event that doesn't really matter much. Next on the list, we have Teen Titans number 3. So Teen Titans has the Demon Fist really run the Teen Titans off. Last we saw them, they jumped into the Robin plane, his commandeered bat plane. And now we kind of get a little bit of a bottle episode, a bottle issue, so to speak, where the Teen Titans are really on their own. And they're kind of going over Damian's history as well as their own history and how it can kind of relate to those things. And how it makes them a lot more similar, a little bit easier to relate to. And how they just need to know more about the situation in order to help out Damian. And Damian interprets this in the entire wrong way, and you can see at the end of the issue exactly how that is, and it's probably going to turn into a rescue story where, the Titans are going to have to come after Damian, bring him back into the fold, and show their support around him. It's a touch on the contrived side, but, for people that are Teen Titans fans, it's going to be perfectly fine, but it's not quite bringing the kind of power and punch that I really wanted out of this story when I kind of started it. Once we're done with the Demon's Fist, we're going to talk about actual demon gods in Carnage number 15. So if you haven't been following along with this story, then basically here's your rundown. Carnage was trapped, he found a book called The Darkhold, he slaughtered a whole bunch of people, Man-Wolf is chasing after him, Eddie Brock's Toxin's chasing after him, there's a new symbiote named Raze, and they're on an island trying to resurrect a dark god that looks really similar to Cthulhu. And in this issue, they do. So it's just a really kind of dark gothic horror story that Jerry Conway's been writing, and it's really him sharpening his teeth for Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vow. So he has a lot of versatility in his writing. It's something that I enjoy, but it's kind of a niche for people, and it's not really portraying Carnage as most people would expect him. He is still a homicidal maniac, but it's just he's kind of being this pawn of a dark god and kind of moving forward with those things. It's really cool, and overall, Carnage as a story is one of the best character descriptions of Cletus Cassidy to come out of comics yet. So I've got to recommend it as an entire arc, but not necessarily something you're going to want to jump on. There's only one more issue left, so it's kind of a tough one to get into. And then another book that's ending is Civil War II, and this is issue number 8. And what do we see in Civil War II? Well, okay, so disclaimer. I didn't really like this crossover event at all. It didn't really hit any of my major points as far as the way the story should be structured or the way the story is going to be told. And ultimately, the most redeeming thing that I can find out about the entire series is the fact that David Marquez absolutely crushes the art. It's fantastic. And what we get in this story is we get to see Ulysses ascend to the level of a cosmic being. That is our plot device for taking this Inhuman that was created singularly for this event, saying that his powers have continuously evolved, and they've evolved to the point where he's on the level of a cosmic power, like eternity, or something like that. It's just one of those things where everything wraps up. You get a whole lot of spectacle with Carol Danvers continuing to fight Tony Stark. They don't even have the brass ones in order to actually, kill the character. They put him into some sort of I'm going to talk about it all in my review, so we'll get on to the next one, which is probably a little bit better. And that next book would be Batgirl number 6. So Batgirl number 6 is her return from her overseas adventures, and this is her on her plane, and it's another little compacted singular issue which tells a story between Babs and Poison Ivy. And they both end up working together. It's a really quaint little series, kind of midpoint. So it's that transition from where the teacher arc was going and now the Back to Burnside arc and the Son of the Penguin arc, which is going to start next issue. It's really just kind of tying those two things together, and I really kind of like the way that this set things up. You know, there's not a whole lot that you can do on a plane, but they decided to make a story out of it, and it was definitely, it wasn't necessarily a strong issue. Batgirl itself hasn't really been the strongest of the books from DC Rebirth, but for people that are fans of the character, I'm sure that it's been more than entertaining, and for people that are new to the character, it's been a decent way to get involved in it. But it's just one of those things where I really like where it's at. I like this variant cover that I picked up from Francis Manapul, and overall, if you've got a remote interest in Batgirl, this is a pretty good spot to jump onto. But a book that's not that easy to jump onto is Black Panther #9. And it's not because the book itself isn't bad, it's just the fact that Ta-Nehisi Coates is getting into the final stretch of his original story arc. He's getting Brian Stelfreeze back, who was the original artist that started the series with him. And they're telling a story after the resurrection of Shuri. And Shuri is like well beyond what Shuri was before. You know, she is seen like a flock of ravens and crows going across the countryside. She's got power, she's got presence, she's got grace. She is taking control of the world of Wakanda. It's just like, she is stunning in every respect. And you see Tetu and Changmir, you know, he's kind of in this resolution. He's off somewhere else. And then Tetu and his forces are really gathering. So there's going to be a final confrontation. The Dora Milaje have kind of pulled back their support for these things and kind of declared themselves their own particular state up in the northern lands of Wakanda. And it's just really interesting because everything's kind of coming to a head. So this is really the action-filled point where we're going to be starting to see a lot of things go down. So it's a really exciting time to be part of Black Panther, but it's definitely not necessarily the best spot to jump onto. However, there is still plenty of time to jump onto Mother Panic. So Mother Panic #2 continues the story of our new hero in quotes, anti-hero, so to speak, in Gotham City. And Violet is off on her way trying to basically take down the person that she was originally intending to kill and kind of capture in the first issue. And we see some very resolving points for Violet's character. You know, she's been built for this singular purpose and ultimately she can't fulfill it. We see her prisoner kind of escape, and we understand that she's not necessarily working alone at this point in time, so that's a really cool reveal. And then her conflict, like, she does something that just really enhances her personality and shows just how bad it is. So you definitely get an idea that she is a very crazy person and that nobody will be calling her after a one-night stand. So Young Animal has a very interesting book on its hands as far as Mother Panic goes. I feel like it's going to be for a very specific mindset of person or a very specific series of people, because Tommy Lee Edwards' art isn't necessarily the most clean. It's definitely grimy, it's grungy, it's dirty, and it fits the personality of this character, the personality of the main protagonist, if you can call her that at this point in time, but it's just not necessarily the subject matter that's really going to capture a whole heck of a lot of people. There is a cameo by Batwoman, so that's pretty cool, and it gives a little bit more of a sense of immersion into Gotham, but it's definitely a book that if you want to figure out where it's going, you're going to have to stick around for a little while. It's not necessarily something that you can kind of get a good idea of in the first 1 or 2 issues. And now that we've read Action Comics 970, we have a really good idea where this is going to go, and it doesn't really look good for Lex Luthor at this point in time. So we get an idea of where the visions come from, how they're kind of portrayed. We get Superman interacting with those things as well as Lex Luthor. We get the backstory of El Call and exactly what happened that caused him to be in his kind of role at this point in time. And then ultimately we do get a little bit more interaction between Lois Lane and the Clark Kent that is currently on Earth in Metropolis while Superman is out in space trying to rescue Lex Luthor. And that is a serious point of contention for the Man in Blue. I mean, he is torn up on the inside about this. It's just like, you know what, if I just let him sit here, he could totally be the bad guy that I was expecting him to be. We could save millions of people, and that just weighs on him heavily. However, he just doesn't prescribe to a global sense or a galactic sense of justice. He subscribes to, you know, the American sense of justice, and without any kind of proof, he is not held guilty. However, he might be changing sides on that perspective. So Action Comics continues the Men of Steel arc, which is a really interesting take on it, and it's going to lead very well into the next series of Superman books, and there's a really big crossover coming up in February-March timeframe, so it's definitely one that you want to hop onto now. Since we wrapped up the Civil War 2 tie-ins in Spider-Man number 10, Spider-Man number 11 offers us something fresh, and that would be the story of Miles Morales' dad and how he kind of reintegrated himself into S.H.I.E.L.D. And this is really just a very elaborate ruse that is meant to test him as a character. It shows a little bit more of Jameson as, you know, like a character and how he's going to be kind of portrayed, and how everything's kind of touch on Miles Morales' dad more than it is going to be Spider-Man, but it's really kind of odd. I don't necessarily know if this is a well-timed portion of this actual story. It just seems like it's kind of out of place, but that's because I know that over the next several issues, like for the next 3 months or so, we're going to be getting Spider-Man and Spider-Gwen kind of as a team-up romance kind of thing. And we don't actually see Spider-Man in this comic book until like the last 3 pages. So it feels like it was just meant to kind of pass a touch of time, but give us a little bit of insight and backstory into his character. Not necessarily unwelcome, but definitely not what I was expecting out of the book. However, in the next book, I got exactly what I was expecting, and that was Justice League vs. Suicide Squad number 2. So when I was really looking at this, I was looking at it as like a Michael Bay movie, like Armageddon or Transformers or something like that. Heavy on spectacle, short on substance, and that's really what we get in this book. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that this is really kind of the big bombastic, like summer blockbuster, except in winter comic book form. And we see Maxwell Lord and his group of compadres kind of going about what they're going to be doing. They're going to be kind of undertaking this task in the background, which is most likely going to impact things in the future issues. But the biggest thing is the conflict between the superheroes and the Suicide Squad. And because Deadshot recognizes the fact that they're not necessarily going to be winning anytime soon if they're going to be grouped together, they split up, and everybody kind of takes on their own different characters. Obviously, you've got Wonder Woman whooping on Harley, you've got Batman beating up on Deadshot. There's a lot of different things that kind of go on here, but the big surprise is that, of course, Enchantress, since she's primarily magic, defeats, so to speak, Superman, and then Killer Frost takes advantage of that situation and awakens an entirely different level of Killer Frost-style power. I'm not necessarily sure how I like the portrayal of Killer Frost, but it's definitely a really cool rendition of this whole thing, and it's something that I'm sure that I'd grow to appreciate. Highly recommend that if you guys haven't really checked this out, give it a shot. It might not necessarily be for everybody, and I could easily see myself not picking this up at all, but it's just one of those things where it's just like, you know what, if I want something like big summer popcorn movie style in a comic book form, this is really giving it to me. However, if you want something just a little bit more down to earth, then we can talk about Flash number 13, because Flash number 13 is a holiday date night special. So that's a really cool, interesting concept, because essentially what Joshua Williamson does in this one-shot is he gives Kid Flash a little bit more development, he gives a little bit of depth to Tar Pit as a character, gives him a little bit of backstory that really helps kind of cement Kid Flash's feelings towards how he's developing and dealing with crime and those kind of things, developing as a hero. And then you see the date night between Barry and Iris, and it's just like, hey, why haven't we made time for this? It's like, well, this is our first or our second or our third or our fourth date. We always get distracted and interrupted. And obviously, Barry has been with at least 3 different women that weren't Iris, and she has noticed. It's not like she's going to be sitting around just pining for Barry Allen, even though she likes him. It's just like, he's got to make the initiative. He's got to make the move. And the fact that they kind of like ditch all the cell phones, they don't deal with any distractions, they end up back at home having a nice, quiet, kind of sit-in kind of date, and we might know how that happens. But it's just one of those situations where it's just like, this is a kind of like heartwarming, end of the season kind of tale, and it's not necessarily that bad. It's really good as a standalone issue, and I really like where this is going, but it's one of those things where I kind of need to see the return of the Rogues, and the fact that we get a little bit of a hint of that in this issue is also a really good thing. Highly recommend you guys grab Flash if you haven't had a chance yet. It's going to be going back to a little bit more of its roots and its origins as far as the first arc goes, and I'm really excited about where that goes. And then we have another book by Brian Michael Bendis, and that is Infamous Iron Man number 3. So if you remember in last issue, what we saw is we saw the Thing breaking into Dr. Doom's, Victor Von Doom, the infamous Iron Man's girlfriends or quasi-girlfriends or not quite girlfriends or ex-Tony Stark girlfriends' apartment, just busting everything up, and Doom was shot. And where do we wake up? We wake up in Switzerland. And Dr. Doom, Victor Von Doom, I gotta stop calling him Dr. Doom. He's the infamous Iron Man. He basically runs down his entire thought process for how he's going to be portraying this Iron Man character. And when you start reading into what Brian Michael Bendis is describing as the thought process for Victor Von Doom, it is distinctly Victor Von Doom, but it is distinctly not the position of a good guy. It is more of like an anti-hero kind of person. It's just like, you know what, I was a god, and it didn't really work out for me. I didn't really change. It didn't really help me out in any respect. So maybe what the universe was trying to tell me is that I should be a good guy instead, because I've already conquered the universe as a bad guy. Maybe I should conquer the universe as a good guy. Maybe that'll be more fulfilling. And that's just like high levels of crazy. And the girl recognizes it, and immediately he just like bamfs her out of there. But the big problem is going to come in the form of Doom's mom. And she makes an appearance too, and she's probably going to play pretty prominently, at least in the next issue, possibly the one beyond that. So it's a book that I'm getting more back on with. It just felt like it was a little bit off in issue number 2, but this is definitely bringing me back into the fold, and I can't recommend Infamous Iron Man enough for people that are interested in Victor Von Doom. Then the next villain comic that we're going to be talking about is Deathstoke. So in Deathstoke number 9, we actually see the first mission that Wintergreen and Slade Wilson ever really went on. And we get to see a young Slade before he ever got his gray hair. We get to see him captured. And this just really emphasizes that Christopher Priest is writing a phenomenal book. You know, he dives deep into the jargon of the military so that way he can kind of relay these things as he's part of an interrogation. So Slade is very familiar with these situations as well as the people that are interrogating him. And then when we get to like how he got his sword and all that kind of stuff, it's a really cool backstory that's really tied into the Deathstroke character. So I'm really excited to see where this one goes, just because Deathstroke was someone that I had almost no interest in, right? You know, he was just like, oh, okay, he's an ancillary character, but he is a very competent villain when he's being portrayed as a villain, but he's also a very versatile kind of character. And this is just making me really appreciate Deathstroke and how he can be written and how he can be characterized. He's not a good guy, and it's very clear that he's not a good guy, but it is a very good story based around a bad guy, and I really like that. Highly recommend you grab Deathstroke if you haven't had a chance yet. This is probably one of the best jumping on points that you'll be able to have for quite some time. And then a book that you probably don't want to read, not because it's bad, but because it's going to kind of hurt your perception of the story, is Titans number 6. So Titans number 6 is pretty interesting because it drops a couple bombs about DC Rebirth. You know, the fact that, oh, wow, yeah, it is, the end of the book is super cool. I mean, after issue number 5, which was probably one of the best standalone Wally West stories or superhero stories that's come out as a single issue like this year, I mean, this is just kind of capstones that and then adds in that kind of DC Rebirth flavor before we kind of head into the next arc. And I just really love the way that this kind of comes off. It's a really great story. It involves all of the characters, but it's still primarily focused around Wally and his return, his resurgence, and his redemption story back in the actual DC Rebirth universe. It's highly recommended from me, but if you have the opportunity, grab Titans 1, actually Titans Rebirth all the way through Titans number 6. That is going to be what you want to read, and this is going to be a great conclusion to that arc when you do. Another arc that's concluding is in Mighty Thor number 14, and this is where we see the conclusion of this kind of two-part Stephen Epting, Jason Aaron matchup, where they're telling the story of the League of Realms going out and trying to kind of save Alfheim. And unfortunately, they don't succeed. It does not go well for anybody. Alfheim is basically, it is 3 sheets to the wind. It is gonzo, man. It is engulfed in flames and fire. And we do get a little bit of backstory on Curse. It's definitely a character that I'm going to have to look into a little bit more because it is interesting how those things kind of came about. The fact that you transition Curse from one to another, where the origin story comes from. So I'm really interested in that character, but it really just, this is a good conclusion before we set up the next big event inside Mighty Thor, the next story arc. And that really involves a much more powerful collection of people or aliens taking on the Asgardians, and that is going to be something special to watch. So issue number 15, this is a great ending, but issue number 15 is really where you should start. Since it is the end of the year, a lot of storylines are ending, and All-Star Batman number 5 isn't any different. What this does is it concludes the storyline between Batman and Two-Face, as well as the introduction of Duke Thomas into that situation. And what we see is that Batman finally reaches his goal. He gets to his conclusion. He's gone over these 500 miles, and he's finally gotten to the place where he needs to be, regardless of how many people he's kind of had to blow by and, you know, how many villains he's had to take out along the way. And what we see now is that this whole conclusion is, it's not good. It's not good, not necessarily in terms of a story. In terms of a story, it's very good, but it's not positive, it's not upbeat, it's very dark, it's very dreary. You know, it kind of ties into Tom King's portrayal of Batman, but it doesn't, and it's just really interesting to see how this kind of unfolds, because ultimately, you know, you've had this conflict between Harvey and Two-Face, and Harvey is just like, he is the I am suicide in this. That personality of Harvey is the I am suicide of this story arc compared to, say, like the Batman. So it's kind of a flip side of the coin, if you will, if we're talking about a Two-Face story. It's very interesting, but it's definitely a book that you're going to kind of want to, like, myself, I got a little bit lost in where things were going in the middle, but then when it came to this end, I was just like, okay, cool, very satisfying conclusion, very good end, and I can't wait to see where issue number 6 goes. Even though we're going to start a series of small one-shots, it definitely gives me a lot more confidence in where Scott Snyder's All-Star Batman vision lies and how things are going to move going forward. Highly recommend you guys go grab all of 1 through 5 if you have the chance. Then when it comes to Wonder Woman, we actually have an intermediate story called In Between the Truth and Lies, and this is where we see the results of Wonder Woman number 11. And this is where she found out that everything was a lie. You know, she had never gone home. Every remembrance or every memory she had of Themyscira was false. And you see her kind of fractured psyche when she takes in that entire concept that over this years, these years of experiences that they were no longer real or perceived to be real, then she kind of just loses it. And it turns this Wonder Woman book into a Steve Trevor story so that way we can transition to where we're going in the next arc, which is the truth. So it's definitely something that's going to be a little bit interesting. I mean, we know that Edda's in hiding. There's this other kind of group of mercenary ladies that are on their way, Poison, as the group was called. Without this kind of rescue operation that just came in from Steve Trevor's men, who knows what really would have happened. But what we do know is that Wonder Woman is now in the care of some mental health kind of facility, and it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of break down and bring back Wonder Woman into the character that she's supposed to be, while kind of accepting this whole realization that she might not necessarily know exactly what's going on, which was clearly indicated in Wonder Woman Rebirth. Highly recommend you guys pick up Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman number 13 is not necessarily mandatory reading, but it's definitely something that's going to fill you in a little bit more on how things got to where they are in the next issue. Another book you should be reading if you haven't already is Detective Comics, and Detective Comics 947 concludes the Victim Syndicate arc, and it is spoiler-filled in more ways than many. It's just like one of those things where you've got spoiler as the character, you've got spoilers at the back end of everything, and it gives you a little bit more clue into DC Rebirth. It's really kind of meant to make you feel the feels. It's meant to kind of pull at your emotions, tug at your heartstrings, and see what kind of things Batman and his family are capable of. But it also does a good situation where it's setting up the strong character of Batwoman and how she's going to be kind of breaking off into her own series, because the next two issues, 948 and 949, are really Batwoman-centric. So it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes. James Tynion IV has done a really good job with Detective Comics, and it is arguably one of the best Batman books that is currently out there, but all three of them are really stellar. But this one, based on the story arcs that have come out so far, might just be sitting on top. 947 is a really good conclusion to this, and it's showing a distinct break in the philosophy of some characters that are on the Bat team versus the others that are going to be sticking around. So, highly recommend you guys go grab Detective Comics. If you haven't been reading it, it's just a really stellar take on Batman's surrounding, his posse, so to speak, and not necessarily Batman himself. The next book is easily one of my favorite independent titles, and that is going to be Seven to Eternity, and this is issue number 4. And what you see when you get into Seven to Eternity is a world that is completely, well, it's not necessarily completely developed, but you get heavy amounts of exposition in kind of like a journal aspect. You get very clear perspectives on the individual characters. You've got really great art from Jerome Opena, and what Rick Remender does is essentially just kind of shovels all of this kind of context into these situations. So if you're talking about issue number 4, what you really get is you get kind of like a little bit of more insight into Adam Osidis, who is, like the son of Zebediah. It's just one of those things where it's just like you kind of see this thought process churning in his brain as he's kind of sitting around, and then you see very clearly where the perspective of others are. Goblet isn't really that well developed. However, Patchwork gets an expressive amount of backstory, and you get a very clear understanding of her mental structure and how things kind of came to be and why she has such hatred for the Mud King. And that is, it's sadly taken away in a scene later on, and then it plants a few seeds. It's one of those things where the churning inside Adam's head, he has a very serious kind of conundrum that he's trying to work out for himself and a reputation that he's trying to live down. And by the end of the book, you're kind of turning and churning on your own thought process to where this book is going and what the motivations of every individual character are and how those things are going to kind of interact. What Rick Remender is doing is he's kind of filling you with hope and uncertainty at the same time. You really want the success of these individual Mossack characters to kind of go about, but you're seeing all these hurdles that are coming up and then possible, main protagonist kind of struggles that are going to cause those things to really kind of get enhanced over time. So, Seven to Eternity is probably one of the best new comics coming out in 2016, and I think that it's going to continue to be that way for a long time. And if the run on Deadly Class and Black Science is any indication, Rick Remender is not going to be letting up anytime soon. Highly recommend you grab Seven to Eternity if you haven't yet. I think every single issue is in reprintings, so go grab all 4 if you haven't had a chance. And now we get into new comics, and the first one I want to talk about is Hulk number 1. So Hulk number 1 isn't about the Hulk. Cool. Now that we've got over that hurdle, basically this is about Jennifer Walters and how she's being portrayed as an individual character without being the actual Hulk. She's no longer 7 feet tall. She's no longer green. She's practicing law as an individual character, as her own human form. And it's really interesting because Mariko Tamaki plays off the fact that everything's set up for her being the Hulk in her giant size. However, with her being in her human form, not everything is going to be the exact same as it was when she was the Hulk before. You see a very distinct difference in how people are interacting with her. They feel like she's a little bit more welcoming, but they're also a little bit more exclusionary. They feel like they don't necessarily understand exactly who's being portrayed here, based on what their experiences are, what their expectations were, what their preconceived notions of Jennifer Walters as the Hulk was, as She-Hulk. And we see that she is like holding back. She is like got the reins and the choke chain so tight on the becoming the Hulk persona because she no longer has the control that she once did. And the fact that it's only over a couple panels, it's very clearly portrayed that this is something that's going to cause her conflict in the future. It's just a really good way to engage in the first level of a story, and I'm really excited about where the Hulk goes. It's not necessarily about smashing and crashing and bashing and destruction. It's about an introspective look at Jennifer Walters and what's happening after the Civil War II aftermath. And that's really kind of an exciting take because you get to look at the psychology. You get to get inside the character's head a little bit, which is really exciting in a comic book. So I recommend you go grab Hulk #1. I'm really excited about where this one's going to go. And overall, I found it really enjoyable. So highly recommend you guys grab it. The other #1 that I picked up was Rocket Raccoon #1. And Rocket Raccoon #1 by Matthew Rosenberg is something that I really expected something else from. It's not necessarily that this is a bad comic book. It's just that what you have to expect is that this is a spacefaring individual. This is somebody that doesn't have any kind of passion or they don't have any kind of ties. They don't care about Earth in the least. And they ultimately find it's a backwards dirtball of like hairless monkeys that are just kind of fraternizing all about the place. They have terrible culture. And this is somebody that's been, like an outlaw. They've got a very callous and frustrating personality. They're very direct and derogatory. They're negative. And I think Matthew Rosenberg writes that kind of character really well. I think that he portrays Rocket Raccoon as how you would expect that kind of person to behave. If they had no filter, they didn't care, and they felt that they were superior to pretty much everybody else because, well, they are. They're a survivor of many galactic wars. They're an outlaw. They got bounties in 12 systems. They've got phenomenal capabilities as far as technology. They are more advanced on every level than everybody else in the society that they're inhabiting, but they're perceived as kind of a rodent or a piece of trash because they look like a raccoon. And I mean, it was not what I was expecting at all from a Rocket Raccoon book. But then again, I've been told not to expect those kind of things from different stuff, kind of give it its own breath, let it speak for itself. While it's not necessarily my favorite book, I can see how this works as far as Matthew Rosenberg is concerned. I'm just kind of have to give it like another issue or something like that just to see if that voice kind of becomes a little bit more stabilized or if there's a real direction moving forward for this particular book. It's not something I can recommend yet, but hopefully it grows into something I can appreciate. And then we get into 80 After Death #2, and unfortunately that's a book that I haven't had the opportunity to pick up yet, but if it's anything like the last issue, I'm definitely going to have to read it at least twice before I do any kind of review on it, but it is one that I'm going to be planning on picking up. As far as everything else, those are all the books that I picked up this Wednesday, but I want to know what you guys thought about all of your books that you picked up, and if you have any kind of commentary on the ones that I grabbed too. So hit me up in the comments down below, and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.